Good morning, everyone, here in Hanson Hall, and good morning to those of you who are in the health facilities or in your apartments and watching this morning's events in your own rooms. I'm happy to introduce our speaker, Marine, hereafter Moe Flannery, whose topic is Dead Whales Do Tell Tales. Moe is the Ornithology and Mammalogy Senior Collection Manager in the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. In this role, she manages over 140,000, I repeat, over 140,000 bird and mammal specimens for use in scientific research. These specimens come from all over the world. In a sense, the California Academy is a global institution. And they range in size, this is what her says, there it is, from an 80-foot blue whale skeleton to tiny hummingbird eggs. So think of the dimensions of that wonderful collection that are available. Moe serves as the principal investigator for several grants supporting the work of the Marine Mammal Stranding Network. This network, of which the Academy is a member, responds when dead whales wash up on our shores. This morning, Moe will describe the kinds of examinations that she and other specialists conduct on these creatures in order to learn from their deaths about the perils confronting living whales. A larger issue, it seems to me, is what can be learned about the perils confronting all sea animals and plants as the oceans warm. Moe earned a BA degree in Asian Studies at Dartmouth, and then an MA in Ecology and Systematic Biology from the San Francisco State University. I'd like to thank Bud and Annalie Trapp for suggesting that we invite Moe to our talk today. So we welcome you to the Sequoias, Moe.
Great.
And we thank you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge and insights on a topic with clear environmental implications.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you all for being here, and for those of you who are watching off-site, welcome, and thank you for joining me. So as David explained, I'm in charge of 140,000 specimens. Here you can see our blue whale, which is on display on the main exhibit floor of the museum, and then some tiny hummingbird eggs. And it's my job to ensure that these specimens exist for future generations. And the reason why we have the specimens is for scientists from all over the world to come to the museum or to borrow specimens that we would loan out to them for any variety of studies that they might want to undertake. Historically, people just looked at specimens for morphology, studying bill lengths, bone size, the whole animal size. But now there are many, many more uses of specimens, including things like DNA studies, stable isotopes, which tell us a lot about the ocean conditions that we're seeing today, and CT scans. People can look for environmental contaminants and other forms of information like hormones that tell us about environmental change. So for marine mammals, we have the world's largest collection of California sea lion specimens, over 3,000 of them. Our overall marine mammal collection is over 6,500 specimens, representing about 49 species of marine mammals found all around the world. We have the world's largest collection of southern sea otters. 1,500 of them are cataloged, and there's probably about 1,500 of them waiting to be cataloged, still in our freezers for preparation. And we have North America's largest collection of Guadalupe fur seals with more than 100 specimens, which doesn't sound like much. But in the past 2 years, we've collected another 200 Guadalupe fur seals. They're undergoing something called an unusual mortality event in our area. And one of the ways that we know this is happening with that species is because of our response to dead marine mammals along the coast. So over the years, More than 185 researchers have used the collection to publish more than 70 scientific publications. So I like to say I'm basically a librarian, but I'm a librarian of things like bones and baleen and complete skeletons and tissues and blubber and earplugs and anything you can think about that could come off of a marine mammal. So that is my primary job, is to go out and to collect these things and to continue to build our collection and to curate it for future researchers. Our Marine Mammal Field Collecting has a very long history. It started with two foremost people at the Academy, Dr. Robert Orr and Jackie Schoenwald, who was a technician. They first started responding to marine mammals in the 50s and 60s. And their work was supplemented by one person, Raymond Bones Bandar. He was a field associate with the museum and worked with us from 1953. His last visit to the beach was in 2013. He died in 2017. But over the course of his collecting, he collected over 6,000 skulls that he housed in his home in San Francisco that have since moved to the museum after he died. All of the specimens came to the Academy. So we spent last year moving skulls from Ray's collection. But because of his collection, he collected over 2,000 California sea lion skulls. And researchers can come in and have this amazing sample size to really see variation in the individuals. If we only had 100, we wouldn't really be able to see that. And he collected under all of our permits, so he was legally collecting all of these specimens. So marine mammals are heavily protected. They're protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Some of them are also under the Endangered Species Act, like the sea otter, the blue whale, the fin whale, sperm whales. And we do all of our work under a stranding authorization issued from the National Marine Fisheries Service and an endangered species permit. So this is the Marine Mammal Stranding Network in California. So the Stranding Network is a national network of organizations, mostly nonprofits, and mostly along the coast, which makes sense. The East Coast, the West Coast, Hawaii, and Alaska. About 120 groups work in the network. Many of them respond to live marine mammals. So you may have heard of the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito. They respond to live marine mammals, bring them into care, rehabilitate them, and release them back into the wild. There are only a handful of organizations that respond to dead marine mammals, and it's certainly a specialty that you have to have a strong stomach for, but that's what we do. So we have one coordinator nationally, some regional coordinators, and 5 geographic regions. We're in with Washington and Oregon in the West Coast region. So here's our main area. So we go from, can you see my cursor moving there? From Año Nuevo in the south, all the way up to Rockport in Mendocino County. And we have a group up in Mendocino County, a small nonprofit called Noyo Center for Marine Science. They just started about 5 years ago, and they're kind of our mentee organization. So we work with them to respond to marine mammals way up north. I don't always have to drive all the way up there, but sometimes I do. And we cover all the bay shoreline too, and often we'll end up with interesting animals somewhere in the bay where they're not supposed to be. So it's about 400 miles of coast and bay shoreline. So we have a very strong collaboration with the Marine Mammal Center. They cover the exact same area that we cover, only they work on the live and we work on the dead. But when it comes to large responses, like this blue whale at Agate Beach in Balaenoptera in 2017, one organization can't really respond sufficiently to something that's 80 feet long. So we get a team together for every large whale. We have about 10 people from the Academy and 10 people from the Marine Mammal Center, and we all work together to try and figure out what happened to the animal. We also receive specimens from them of animals that have died in their care or were involved with interesting studies. And we've done some of our own studies with them looking at CT scans of porpoises. So whenever a large animal washes up on the shore, one of the things that the National Marine Fisheries Service wants to know is, why did it die? Were humans involved? What is it, a natural event? What happened? So we try to do a field necropsy, which is an autopsy on an animal, whenever we can. And we're looking for things like whether it's fisheries related or bycatch related. Did it ingest some fishing gear? Was it hit by a ship? And then we're also looking for signs of disease. So when an animal washes up on the shore, you can't always tell from the outside. I actually find it astonishing when we walk up to a whale carcass. They look perfect from the outside most of the time. This is a blue whale. This was my first blue whale in 2010. She was 79 feet long, and she was on the beach at Bean Hollow in San Mateo County. And when she hit the shore, she had been so full of gas that the fetus she was carrying ended up on the beach as well. So we got to study 2 whales at one time in this situation. But for the most part, other than missing her skin, which happens with decomposition, she's very intact, and you can't tell anything from the outside of the body. But when we opened it up inside, I'm sorry, I should have given you the PG-13 warning, but there is a little bit of blood. This is probably the worst slide that I have. I tried to keep it a little acceptable for people. But we're looking for signs of injury, broken bones, and hemorrhaging. And if we find hemorrhaging in the muscles, that tells us that the animal was alive when it was first hit. So you can see here on the picture on your left, this is healthy muscle along here, and then you see some hemorrhaging, big black clots of blood. And so that tells us that this animal was alive when it was hit. She did have broken bones, so we find the hemorrhaging, and then we dig even deeper to find the broken bones. So this is another example. This is an adult female humpback whale that was 45 feet long. She had high levels of domoic acid in her urine, which we don't really know what effect domoic acid, that's a natural occurring harmful chemical that marine mammals get. Sea lions have domoic acid toxicity, and they end up in different places than they're supposed to be. Their navigational systems get all messed up. But we don't know what a high reading is for large whales, but it's always good to gather that data and to have it on hand. So we didn't know what effect the DA had, but once we opened her up, we found broken bones. And here I am taking, those are her vertebrae, and the processes on the vertebrae are just loose and moving around. So that tells us that this animal died from a ship strike. So and there's one solid one at the end. And you can see all the hemorrhagic muscle around it as well. So why is it important to figure out if the animal was alive when it was hit? Well, sometimes animals end up in San Francisco Bay. Sometimes they come in on the front end of a ship and fall off in the bay. And really, those shipping companies are responsible when an animal dies. They have a certain number that they can hit each year, which no one can ever keep track of, but there is a certain number. But we want to know when it happens, and we want to confirm it. And if we don't know whether it was alive or dead, the shipping company says, well, the whale was probably floating dead, and then it got on the front of our boat. And do you know how hard that is? Like, to have we couldn't even reproduce it if we tried, like have the whale floating and then try and get it on the front of a boat. You just couldn't really do it. And most of the time, we show that the animal was alive when it was hit. So one of the things that we're very lucky in San Francisco Bay, if an animal ends up in the San Francisco Bay floating around, there are towing companies that we work with, and they help us out. And Angel Island is very agreeable. The state park, they have a small beach We call it whale necropsy beach. They don't officially call it that. But they allow us to tow the whale carcasses to that beach, and it's not accessible by land, so you don't end up with a lot of people coming down there and taking parts, which is illegal. So we do a lot of necropsies on Angel Island, which makes a really nice day. We get a boat ride out to Angel Island, and then we do a necropsy, and then we get a nice boat ride back. So this is a fin whale that was in the bay in August of 2015 in Alameda, and then we did a full necropsy. And this one actually does show a little bit of an area. When I see this, where the skin has come off here, but not anywhere else, that's where we focus, and that's where we found the broken bones on this animal. Here's that blue whale from Balaenoptera. So this one was actually one of the most difficult necropsies for all of us, not just because it was such a large whale. She was 80 feet long, but she had the most extensive damage of any whale we've ever seen. So the whole process was very disturbing. Like 17 of 19 vertebrae that we found were broken, and ribs were broken, and the flipper was broken. But the good thing that came out of this carcass, which comes out of a lot of carcasses, is we have all this information about the whale and how it died. But we also have these bones that we can donate to educational groups. So we worked with a lot of educational groups in Marin County and in San Francisco, and we donated vertebrae and different bones from these animals. We did that with the Bean Hollow State Beach whale too. It went to 30 different educational organizations for them to use in their trainings. This is what it looks like when a whale comes in on the bow of a ship. You can see this carcass under my pointer over the front of the ship, and then this is the carcass on the beach on Angel Island. So this was a subadult fin whale, and also we showed that it was a confirmed ship strike. And while we were doing the necropsy on this one, there was a film team from the BBC and from PBS that came out and filmed with us. So that was really interesting. They weren't recording us. They had a very famous naturalist who does these kinds of shows, so they were interviewing her most of the time, and she was very fun. But we were in the background of the film. So I can say I've been on PBS, although I haven't seen it, so I assume that I've been on PBS. So what does all this information tell us? Well, for years we've been collecting data on large whales and whether or not they've been hit by ships. And in 2013, the National Marine Fisheries Service, along with the Coast Guard and other members of the maritime industry, including the Golden Gate National Recreation Area and all of the marine sanctuaries in our area, the Cordell Bank and the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, got together, and they worked to change the shipping lanes in San Francisco and in Los Angeles based on some of the data that we and other organizations had collected about dead whales. So the pink lines on this shipping area map, this is the Port of San Francisco. The pink lines show the old shipping lanes. So the number of large ships that come into San Francisco were required to only come in the shipping lane from this point on Point Reyes into the bay, and then these other 2 points. So there's only certain points where they're mandatory that they funnel in that one direction. But if you have a lot of whales out here around the Farallon Islands, you don't really want the ships to get to the Farallones and then go whichever way they want to go, because that's more of a threat for the whales. So in 2013, they extended the shipping lanes out to this green area. So now the shipping lanes are much longer, especially around Point Reyes, because there are lots of whales off of Point Reyes. So the ships have to stay in the lanes until they get much further out, and then they can go whichever way they want. They also have voluntary slowdowns coming into San Francisco Bay, and surprisingly, a lot of the ships do slow down because they get awards at the end of the year. They'll get a platinum award or a gold award if 90% of their ships slow down. And they really like that, which is, I was surprised by that. I would think money would have more of a pull for these shipping companies, but really it's the awards and being able to put the plaque up that says, you know, we slowed down. So that's great news. We don't know whether the shipping lanes have changed the number of whales that have been hit. It's only been 5 or 6 years, so we're still collecting data, and then that'll be analyzed. For us, our data sets need to be long-term collection of data before we have answers. So our data definitely adds to some conservation methods and management decisions, as in the case of the shipping lanes. So sometimes we see whales that have signs of trauma, but there are no broken bones, so there might be hemorrhaging, and we just don't know what that comes from. So we're not able to say whether or not it was hit by a ship. And then other times we see really interesting situations. So this is a gray whale calf, and it's pretty much a whale pancake at this point, right? We got to Portuguese Beach in Sonoma County, and there's this flat, didn't even look like a whale anymore, flat on the beach. And we thought, wow, we're never going to be able to figure this one out because we're probably not going to find any bones in there. But what we noticed is, can you see these lines on the carcass here? There's like 3 lines there and some lines there. And it's missing part of its lower jaw, including its tongue. So this gave us the answer. This gray whale was killed by an orca. So orca, those are orca teeth marks, the rake marks along the body. So orcas, when the gray whales are migrating north, orcas hang out at Monterey Bay. There's the big canyon there, so the whales are susceptible. Moms and their calves are traveling north. Sometimes the calves are having trouble, and the orcas will actually attack gray whale calves off of Monterey and even off of our coast further north. And they don't always eat the whole animal. Many times they just eat the tongue. We don't understand why. It might be older orcas teaching their young how to hunt, and then they just pull the tongue, which must be a delicacy. But we do see those telltale teeth marks, those orca rake marks. So sometimes the carcass, even if it's flat, will give us an answer to what happened. Here's another one that has rake marks. You can really see them there where the orca teeth just pulled along the skin. And this is another gray whale calf that was up in Point Reyes National Seashore. So again, it was the victim of an orca. And then in smaller cetaceans, which we do respond to, you often will see marks, teeth marks, rake marks. So this is a very young bottlenose dolphin. It's only about 4 feet long, so it's just a calf. You can even see these are the natal folds from when it came out of the uterus. And it has all these teeth marks all over it. So dolphins, even though that TV show Flipper tried to make them out to be really good guys, they really are not. They're kind of jerks. Bottlenose dolphins are the jerks of the ocean world. So they actually will, a bottlenose dolphin male, juvenile male, like a teenager, will kill young males and young female calves. So when the female is with her calf, some of the males will gang up and kill the calf. Then they're committing infanticide. And the theory in science is that then it allows another male to mate with the female and get his genes into the gene pool. But these are teenager bottlenose dolphins that are doing it, so we're not exactly sure why. So they do kill the young of their own species. And then one thing that we've had in our area is bottlenose dolphins killing harbor porpoises. So a harbor porpoise adult is about 5 feet long, so a very similar size to a baby bottlenose dolphin. And in 2011, 12, and 13, every week we had a harbor porpoise that had been beat up and killed by bottlenose dolphin. It's slowed down a little bit in the last few years, but the harbor porpoises made their way back into San Francisco Bay in the last 10 years. They were gone from San Francisco Bay for over 60 years. The bay is much cleaner now, so the porpoises and the dolphins are moving back in, and even some whales are back in San Francisco Bay. So last spring we had lots of gray whales in the bay. The summer before, not this summer, but last summer we had humpback whales, 20 humpback whales just swimming around San Francisco Bay for the whole summer. This year there have only been a handful of them, but the bay is cleaner and these animals are moving back in. So there are more interactions between the bottlenose dolphins and the harbor porpoise in our area. But sometimes the teeth marks aren't always a bad story. This is an adult female bottlenose dolphin. She's kind of wedged in the rocks here. Her skin is missing, but we could still see rake marks all over her skin. So we thought, this is weird. She's an adult. Why would she have rake marks? They're not orca marks because they're close together. We took a bottlenose dolphin skull and lined it up with the picture of the teeth marks, and it fit. So we knew it was other bottlenose dolphins. But we're wondering, why does this adult female have all these marks on her body? Well, one of the things that we do is we take photos for identification purposes of many of the carcasses that we find on the beach. So whales will take fluke pictures, and there are catalogs of humpback whales identified all the way from Alaska to Mexico. Bottlenose dolphins, in this case, we took a picture of her dorsal fin, and you can see the markings on the dorsal fin. This is her dead on the beach. You can see this little notch here and the triangle here, and here that is in the live animal. So we send the ID photos out to the researchers along the coast who are watching the live animals. They're out there on boats all the time, looking and identifying and following them. And they were able to identify her. Her name was Falce, they also named them. And she was first identified by researchers in 1991 in San Diego as an adult female. So in 91, she was at least 5 years old. And then she moved up to Monterey. And in Monterey, that's where she got all those teeth marks on her body, because she was part of a nursery group, so adult females that take care of young together. And the researcher told us that that group is particularly mouthy, and they like to always grab at each other with their teeth, so that's why they have all these marks on their body. So I guess bottlenose dolphins are really not that much of a jerk. Maybe the females are better because they work together than the males, but I still don't like that they kill dolphin or porpoises. So we also have a group in our area, Golden Gate Cetacean Research, which is now part of the Marine Mammal Center, and they identify all the harbor porpoises and the bottlenose dolphins that come into the San Francisco Bay. They stand on the bridge and they take photos of them going under the bridge. And at any one day during high tide, you can see about 100 harbor porpoises going in and out of San Francisco Bay. So they have their hands full, but you can see here's the animal on the table, the necropsy table, and there's some markings, and there she is in real life with her calves. And then here's another marking on the other side. So those help them identify them in real life, and then we complete their story when we tell them what happened to them and where they were found dead. Sometimes we find really interesting interactions with whales on the beach. This is a sperm whale. This was the first whale I ever worked on in 2008. So Ray, our volunteer, had done all of our marine mammal work up until that point, and then he broke his leg. And a week later, this sperm whale ended up in Point Reyes, so I got to go to my first whale, which was a big one. And we found 400 pounds of fishing net in the belly of the whale. Yeah, so the fishing net is still on display at the Marine Mammal Center, and that's probably what caused his death, because he could no longer digest food, and his digestive system wasn't working because of the marine debris. So we report all of that to the National Marine Fisheries Service. So those are all pieces of information that they use. We also see entanglements. In the past few years, there have been a lot more entanglements in fishing gear of live whales. There's actually a team that goes out, and they're called the disentanglement team. If a whale is seen swimming with fishing gear on it, they get the call, they all jump in their boats, and they go to where the whale is. They put a buoy on it, and they'll follow it, and then they'll go out and they'll try and cut the entanglements off. And they are often very successful. But sometimes we don't get reports until the animal is dead. So this is an orca up in Fort Bragg, and it was wrapped in crab pot gear. And the crab pot gear, we were able to identify it to the crab pot fishery. So NOAA was able to talk to the fishermen about his fishing gear. And in general, NOAA is working very closely with the fishing community because no one wants to see a whale get caught in crab pots or any other kind of fishing gear. So they're trying to figure out a solution, whether it's crabbing at different times or putting out fewer traps or developing nets that ropes that break more easily, but they're working on it. Unfortunately, this whale only had that crab pot on it for about a day or two, because that's when the fishermen reported it as being put out. But because orcas are so high stress animals, just having the crab pot attached to him was stressful enough that caused his death. So when we did the necropsy, we found whole harbor seals and California sea lions in its stomach. It's one thing to reach into a whale's throat and come out with fur on your hand. At first we were like, wow, this is so weird. There's fur in this throat. And then we realized, oh, must be an orca that eats marine mammals. So it must be a transient. So we knew which group it came from based on the food in its stomach. So we collected the entire skeleton of this orca because it was so special. And the group at the Mendocino Center for Marine Science held a whole workshop in 2017 and articulated the skeleton, and now it's on display up in Fort Bragg. So we were able to take a sad situation where this animal died unintentionally and turn it into a learning experience for the entire community. And for the Fort Bragg, the outer Mendocino coast communities, they don't have a lot of resources like this. So it's really nice for people to see this beautiful orca, which is probably the largest orca, 25-foot male, in any display area anywhere in the U.S. So entanglements can affect whales in other ways too. This is a gray whale that had an amputated fluke. So we had a pretty good idea of what happened when those crab ropes or any kind of fishing line gets wrapped around their tail and they continue to swim. It gets tighter and tighter, and it can cause a slow amputation. So we reported this one to National Marine Fisheries Service, and they sent us a video of a whale. So the dead one was in Fort Bragg, and this video was taken in March off of the San Diego coast, and it was dead in Fort Bragg in April. So it was making its way back to Alaska, and the whale watching ship was actually able to take a video. So, whales use their flukes to push them along, and because this one didn't have a fluke, it was coming up for air, and then when it was diving, it was turning its body, so it was using the side of its body to push itself along. But obviously, without a fluke, it would be very hard to travel all the way to Alaska to feed in the summertime. So that's why it ended up on the beach in Fort Bragg. Sometimes we see propeller wounds. This is a harbor porpoise that had obvious injuries from a small boat. And then sometimes we see things that we can't really identify. So this is a young gray whale that was in San Francisco Bay. No signs of any trauma or injury or ship strike, but it did have a congenital deformity where its cervical vertebrae were almost at a 90-degree angle. So I don't think it was able to feed appropriately because it couldn't. Its head was at a weird angle. So that's really interesting. And then sometimes things are just too decomposed and we can't tell what's going on. This is a gray whale from Manchester Beach up north in Mendocino County, and it was just too decomposed to really figure anything out. And then sometimes we just don't know. This was a whale that washed up live in Stinson Beach, which we are very lucky on the west coast because of our coastline and the continental shelf. We don't end up with a lot of whales stranding alive on our beaches. They don't get lost like bottlenose dolphins do in Massachusetts inside the bay and have to get lifted over the Cape back out to the ocean, or down in the Carolinas in Florida when they end up on barrier islands. We're very, very lucky, and I'm very grateful that we don't have that situation happen here on the West Coast. But this was one animal that washed up alive. It was only alive for a few hours on the beach, and then it did die. And we were able to do a necropsy on it, but we never got any positive results. We did all sorts of histology testing and tissue work because it was so fresh. We never get them very fresh. But nothing came back positive. So in this situation, it's a young fin whale calf. It was only 43 feet long. We'll never know what happened to that animal or why it ended up on the beach. And when they end up on a beach like that, an animal this size, there is really no way to get it back into the ocean. And they're probably sick to begin with. That's why they are where they are at on the beach. So putting them back into the ocean doesn't help them at all either, because they probably are not going to survive. Sometimes we just can't get to the beach, especially up in Mendocino County. This is a calf, another humpback calf. You can't really tell from the far away photo, but we were able to get a drone to fly over it. It's one of the only times we've been able to use a drone, so technology is working for us. And the drone flew over, so we were able to identify it to species. And it even helped us identify the size, because looking at the turkey vultures, we know the size of a turkey vulture. So we just measured how many turkey vultures it would take to take up this entire length of this carcass, and we estimated it to be about 400 centimeters. So this was a humpback whale calf. So we never did figure out what happened to it, but at least we know the species, and that's been recorded, and those data are in the national database. We've had a couple of sperm whales. That first one that had all the fishing nets, and then this one was in 2015, a 50-foot male, probably a really old male. I'm still waiting on the aging of his teeth from a researcher, but he had no obvious cause of death. The really interesting thing with toothed whales and dolphins is that you can take the teeth and you can cut them in half, and then you can measure the layers inside the teeth, just like you can count the rings of a tree, the dentin and the cementum layers inside the tooth. So researchers were able to age this animal, but they also took tiny pieces of each layer with a drill. They made powder of each layer of the tooth, and that told them where the animal was feeding during that growth period of its life. So all these amazing things that we never knew we could study from just the inside of the tooth. And from baleen as well. You can take a piece of baleen and take samples off the edge, and it will tell you what hormones the animal had active over the last period of time, depending on the growth of the animal. So in a blue whale, it's about 16 years per piece of baleen. It can tell you if it's a female, when she was pregnant and when she was nursing calves based on the hormones in the baleen. Looking at stable isotopes can tell us where they were feeding in the ocean during that period of time. And you can even see stress hormones in males and females that tell you maybe when they were undergoing a stressful event. This is a rare species that we only have 3 of in the collection at the Academy. This is a Baird's beaked whale in 2003 on Ocean Beach. There's Ray in all of his glory. I'm surprised he's wearing gloves here because typically he just went out barehanded, barefoot. We now wear boots and gloves, and we're much more careful these days. But he used to get right in there. So that was a Baird's-beaked whale that's now on display in the museum. And then we got another one of those in 2016 up in Point Reyes. So these are a very pelagic species. It spends most of its life way out in the ocean. So we don't know much about them. But it's important to have them archived in the museum collection. And the first one that the Academy ever collected was from 1925. This is the Santa Cruz sea monster. So it washed up on Moores Beach, or the Moores Beach monster. Some people call it the Moores Beach monster. It washed up and it kind of looked like it had a neck, the way that it had decomposed and the bones had come out of the skin. People were convinced that it was a sea monster, like the Loch Ness monster. But an expert from the California Academy of Sciences went down to Santa Cruz and confirmed that no, it is not a plesiosaur. This is a Baird's beaked whale. And they collected it for the museum, and we still have it in our collection today. So I'm very proud to show people the Santa Cruz sea monster whenever I can. There are still some groups out there that believe it really was a sea monster, and that we're hiding it in our collection. This is my favorite specimen, also an uncommon species in our area. This is an 18-foot juvenile male orca, and he washed up on Thanksgiving. I called it my black and white Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, because we went out to look at it. And when we first walked up to the carcass on the beach, you can see his teeth are all worn down to the gum line, but he wasn't very big. Orcas are mature at about 20, 25 feet. And his dorsal fin was very short. They usually are about 5 feet tall. His was only a couple of feet. So we knew he wasn't old, but we didn't really know why his teeth were worn down. So we took pictures again, identification pictures. So the saddle patch is a helpful ID, and the dorsal fin. And we sent those to the researchers who study orcas. And here he is alive. So this is him dead in 2011 in Point Reyes. And the last time he was seen alive was in September of 2011, so 2 months before, off of an island in British Columbia. So he was 0319 is what his name was. He's in a catalog of offshore ecotypes. So there's 3 ecotypes of orca: transients, offshores, and residents. Residents live up in Washington and eat fish like salmon. Transients, like that big 25-footer in Fort Bragg, eat marine mammals and gray whales. And these offshores eat sharks. So the reason his teeth were worn down was from eating sharks. Shark skin has dermal denticles like sandpaper, and it just wears down their teeth. Here's where he was seen all throughout his lifetime, starting back in 2002 all the way to when he died in 2011. So he traveled a lot from Alaska through Canada and then into California. And at the time, we couldn't figure out why he died. There was no real obvious signs at necropsy. But we did put him together as part of an exhibit at the Academy during the summer of 2013. We had 37 volunteers who spent the whole summer articulating him on display for the public, so our visitors could watch us put him back together. And once we got him back together and got his bones back together, we noticed these injuries to hit one of his ribs. So usually when you have broken bones from a ship strike, you have many broken bones, not just one. And this one actually had an old injury. So this calloused area is an old break that had healed over, and then it had this new break. And then we looked back, and sure enough, we had seen some blood in the lungs and in the blowhole. So based on this finding, and there was a little bit of blood staining in his vertebrae above those breaks, our best hypothesis is that this orca was the victim of another orca. So orcas also, like bottlenose dolphins, kind of pick on each other and beat up on each other. So he was a young male, and maybe another one in his pod found his weakness, right, his one rib on that side, and kept jabbing at him, and then broke it finally a second time, which punctured his lung. So we don't know for sure if that's the case, but it's a pretty good story. And there's no other sign of what the cause of death would be, so it's a plausible hypothesis. So he hangs in the exhibit hall in the museum. When you come in the front, there's a T-Rex, and if you look really carefully up behind the T-Rex, there's my orca. And I call it mine because it took like 6 visits out to the beach with a crew of people, really hard hill to climb, carrying all these bones out. I feel like I put some blood, sweat, and tears into this carcass. So he's my orca, and he's hanging where everybody who comes out of the planetarium walks past him and can see a good interpretive display about him and learn more about orcas. We also have bones that we clean up on our roof at the museum, so visitors can walk out and they can see the bones drying in the sun up there. We don't have any other space to really store them outside to clean them, large bones. So it's a perfect area for us to get nature to do the work and for our visitors to actually see bones on the roof. We currently have a display of about 400 California sea lion skulls, all collected by Ray Bandar, hanging up on the wall in the museum with a little game that kids can play because there's 4 imposters in there. We had a skulls exhibit, almost, I would say half of it was marine mammals. That was in 2003, and then again in 2014. A whales exhibit a few years ago, and a built for speed exhibit, which was when we put the orca together. Everyone loves looking at marine mammal specimens. And we just last summer, it's been a year now, opened an exhibit called Giants of Land and Sea. So this is the Baird's-beaked whale from Ocean Beach in 2003, is now on display on the main floor. We have a humpback whale skull, a minke whale skull, sperm whale jaws, and every species of pinniped found in this area, plus a bottlenose dolphin and a common dolphin, all on display for people to see. So our work has been particularly important this past year. Generally, we would average maybe a total of 6 to 8 whales per year overall, all species, maybe 1 or 2 gray whales per year, and mostly calves that were orca kills, like I showed you earlier. But last spring, between March, April, and May, we had 14 dead gray whales in the San Francisco Bay Area. So within a very short time period, they were almost all adults. And we worked really hard to get a necropsy on 12 of them, 12 of the 14. So 7 of them showed that they were malnourished, that they didn't have very good fat layers, and that they had no food in their bodies. 4 of them were actually ship strikes, and 1 was a ship strike and malnutrition. 2 of them we weren't able to identify. But because of our collaborations with the Marine Mammal Center and our work with people towing the whales, we were able to gather all this really important data about the dead gray whales last spring. And now we're part of a national investigation working with the government here in the US, folks in Mexico and in Canada. We have whale researchers, both live whale researchers and folks like us who deal with the dead whales from all along the coast. And from Mexico to Alaska, during that period of time, there were over 200 dead gray whales. So this is very similar to something that happened in 1999 and 2000. The gray whale population had gotten diminished during whaling, and then it had come back to some high levels. And then in 1999 and 2000, they saw 600 dead whales along the same coastline, Mexico to Alaska. They were only able to necropsy 2 of them back then. They didn't have the support, and they also didn't have the carcasses in easy places. So already we're steps ahead of where they were in 1999 and 2000 in this investigation to try and determine what's happening with the gray whales along the coast. Gray whales have a really interesting life history strategy. What we know of it, and maybe we're going to learn new things about them too with this investigation. But typically, right now, all the gray whales are in Alaska, and they're all feeding in Alaska for the whole summer. And then December, January, they're going to swim back down to Baja, and they're going to give birth in the lagoons in Baja. A lot of people go to Baja and pet the whales, the calves that come up to the boats. And then they have to swim all the way back to Alaska to feed again next summer. And our understanding is that they don't feed from when they leave Alaska through the breeding and then back up to Alaska. So almost 9 months of not eating before they get back. Now, hopefully, as we learn more about them, we'll learn that they do feed along the coast. But what we know now is that they don't. And we're thinking that something in the waters in Alaska, there was the warm water blob that you probably all heard about in 2015. We have researchers who are studying where they are in Alaska right now, where they're feeding, and what the food supply is, and whether or not there is actually enough food up there for them. So we think at this point it probably is a climate change situation with the warmer water reducing the amount of copepods. They feed on marine invertebrates that they're able to feed on. But we don't know whether or not there could also be some disease going on. So there are about 30 of us scientists who are working together on this team to try and determine what's going on with the gray whales. So we're all getting geared up for next March, April, and May, and to gather more data on them, and hopefully we'll learn what's actually happening. So all of our information is helpful to science, but people can also help as well. There's several apps that people who are out on the ocean can use to report whales when they see them. And we use their data plus our data together, and these are all whale sightings primarily around the Farallon Islands, so all the whale watching boats add data to this. We just received a grant this year to work with the Marine Mammal Center to educate people using San Francisco Bay about the whales that are in the bay. With the return of humpbacks and gray whales to the San Francisco Bay, we want to make sure that ships know that there are whales in the bay and that they slow down in the bay as well. So we're working with the Marine Mammal Center to do a public outreach campaign next spring to make sure we reach the ferry companies, any sailors, paddle boarders, anyone you can think of, the swimmers that use the bay, to let them know about the whales that have moved back into San Francisco Bay. So I do have to thank our funding sources. So we're partially funded by the Academy, but a lot of my staff members are fully grant funded, and I've been very grateful to receive several Prescott grants from the government over the past 11 years. And then, of course, with a large whale, none of this work could happen without tons of volunteers and other organizations that all work together with me getting stinky out on a carcass. They don't have to do the reports or do the cleanup afterwards, but they have fun out there. So I'm grateful to all of the folks that help out. And if any of you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. There's one over there.
Thank you very much. Let's see, is this on? It is not on. There we go. Okay. Thank you very much, Mo, for a very interesting, I mean, it looks like you're solving murder mysteries along as you,
It
as
feels
you go.
like
I mean,
it when
you know,
you're out there.
This is what scientists do. They find something they don't understand. They try to figure out what is the answer to this, what are the possibilities, and you can just sense from you the excitement in trying to figure out the answer. In some cases, you say, can't do it.
Yep.
But that was very, very, we appreciate it very much. Let's have some time for questions over there.
When was the Noyo Marine Center set up?
The Noyo Center for Marine Science started in 2013, I think. They've only been in existence for 6 years. And they started with a core group of 5 adventurous young scientists who wanted to start a marine science center. And so they've done a lot for Mendocino and for Fort Bragg. Oh, did you? She taught him. Oh, great. Yeah, it's great to have science teachers around, and they're doing a wonderful work up there.
Earl?
Let me just say, I was very happy to see those pictures of Ray Bandar.
Yes.
He's the fellow who collected the 6,000 skulls of seals and sea lions. I was a docent at Año Nuevo for about 12 years. And when I was a first-year docent there, it would have been 99 or 2000, I was leading a group of maybe 20 Cub Scouts out on the dunes. And I see this guy tromping down the beach. I had no idea who it was, but he was bloody. He had about a 12-inch knife in his hand.
Yes.
and a burlap bag dripping with blood.
Yes.
And he's coming toward us. So-
I'm not surprised.
So what do I do? Fortunately, there was a ranger nearby who explained to me what Ray Bandar was up to.
Yes.
He collects
I
skulls.
can't tell you the number of times we would get reports from the police, the local police, that there was a homeless guy on a elephant seal in Half Moon Bay eating it, right? Well, he wore a jacket that he had been given from the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary for like a thank you for 15 years of service. He wore it for about 15 years, and it was all ripped up and everything. We gave him a new Cal Academy jacket, and I said, Ray, why don't you use the Cal Academy jacket so people know that you're official and not a homeless person? He said, well, why would I want to get that all dirty when I got this old one? So,
Sounds just like you.
yes.
You mentioned that that there was some kind of allowance for ships that they can only hit whales a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Is there any enforcement to that, or is it just something that?
There's very little enforcement. Part of it is that most of the time, when a whale washes up, there's no evidence of who the ship was that was responsible. If it does come in on a ship and we know the name of the ship, then NOAA will go to the shipping company, and often they will have to pay some sort of fee to help with the necropsy fees and things. We never see it, but NOAA will accept it. But in general, there are 2 NOAA law enforcement officers, I believe, on the West Coast. One just started. He's down in Monterey, and the other one is up in Oregon. And they're dealing mostly with illegal fishing activities, so they don't have time to deal with the large whale, any sort of large whale enforcement situations, or any other. We have sea lions that have been shot and things, and there just isn't enough staff for them to deal with it. But if they do come in on a certain ship, then we do report it, and that counts as part of their take. So.
I have a question. You'd mentioned that disease might be a problem in the death of a whale. How would one find that out? And are there some trends in the nature of diseases, and what might that tell us about any environmental issues that are at stake?
Right, so that's partly why we partner with the Marine Mammal Center, because they have veterinarians on staff, we don't. And their staff veterinarians will take samples for histology and for DNA analysis for pathogens. So they deal mostly with the soft tissues, and then we're the hard tissue experts, like all the broken bones and which bone is which. That's where Cal Academy and myself feature in. So they would send off tissues for histological studies, for contaminant studies, and for disease studies. Now, we don't often know what diseases to look for, which is, I think, what we're going to discover with this gray whale investigative team, is that because we have a little more resources and more samples, we'll be able to test for different diseases. But that domoic acid toxicity, that could be a potential problem. That's when there's a big harmful algal bloom, then there's more domoic acid in the water, and then it ends up in the animals. And those toxic levels could cause diseases. And that would then tell us about why are there these algal blooms. Is it environmental runoff from agricultural fields, or is it the oceans warming? And right now, I don't know if you've heard, but there is another blob forming of warm water off of the west coast. And we're all concerned about the repercussions that that's going to have. And especially in Alaska, because in 2015, when we had that first warm water blob, the oceans here were about 2 or 3 degrees higher Celsius, which is much higher than normal. And it continued in Alaska for a much longer period of time. And for the ocean to produce the type of foods, the krill and the copepods and things that these large whales need, they need more cold water upwelling, not warm water. So with these domoic acid blooms, we might learn more about what's going on with the ocean conditions.
I'm wondering what happens to the carcass of these gigantic creatures.
That's a great question. The official policy of National Marine Fisheries Service is to let nature take its course, and then they provide food to coyotes in Point Reyes or other predators, turkey vultures, gulls, and invertebrates as well. So in most places, the carcass is just left to decompose. If we have the ability to do that, that's what will happen. So Angel Island is perfect because nobody goes to that beach. They can't get there, so the carcass just sits there after we're finished and decomposes naturally and feeds the whole environment. Now, other areas like Pacifica are more of a problem, and we had one gray whale wash up in Pacifica, and it was in an area where it could not get towed out. We will sometimes work with National Marine Fisheries Service to tow a carcass out, but you have to go far enough out and know the currents so it doesn't come in on somebody else's beach and then it's somebody else's problem. So that's what happened with the Pacifica situation.
Okay.
And that took several months before it finally decomposed, and then you have to deal with lots of complaints. That big sperm whale that was also in Pacifica, but on a sandy beach. There was the sperm whale and a humpback whale within a 2-week period in Pacifica. And the city had to dig a couple of big holes and bury them. So that happens on Ocean Beach as well. They get buried. But in general, we leave them to decompose. And if we can donate bones and things to educational groups, we try our best to do that as well.
And our final question over there.
Here we go.
It's a comment. As an example of what happens to a carcass, I lived out in the country. I had a dead possum in my driveway, and I left it there to see how long it would take for it to be nothing but possum skin and bones. It took 24 hours.
Wow. Wow.
And it was just a pile of bones.
That's amazing.
There was a big flock of turkey vultures who lived about a quarter of a mile away.
Yeah. So you gave them a good meal. Yeah. I think our whale carcasses last a little longer than that. Usually it takes a week or two before it really starts to fall apart. But it's surprising. Angel Island, I think we must have done 6 or 7 necropsies out there last spring with all those gray whales. And you wouldn't even know it from the beach right now. Either they get buried as the sand changes or they wash out. There's one skull still visible. But the ocean takes care of things and the bay take care of things. So we're very lucky to live in this area.
A concluding thought. One takeaway for me, Mo, is that yes, there are all sorts of human activities which cause the death of whales. Ships hit them. They get caught and snared in the various things that pots, that crabs and so on. But nature is just killing animals all the time because animals need to eat other animals in order to survive. So orcas take on these other porpoises and so forth. So we're seeing, you're seeing at the end of death, the sources of death that are caused by other animals doing what they have been, intrinsically programmed to do.
Yeah.
So this combination of the human impact, but also the impact of nature that your work so clearly reveals. And thank you so much for this presentation.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
There are a couple of other folks here with me if you want to talk to any of us about the Academy and the work that we do. But otherwise, thank you all so much. Enjoy your day in this beautiful area.